and welcome to everybody. It's good to be here, and what a zchut, what a wonderful thing, a merit, and a wonderful quirk of fate to be here for the 4-year anniversary of this sit. And I love how it was put in the dedication, this virtual Mishkan that IJS has created. So much gratitude for what has been made possible in these last 4 years. I know I've benefited from it. Uh, I also just want to say, sometimes I know we're used to putting in dedications for healing or remembrance, intentions as well into the chat before we begin. Want to just lift that up again because I think it's important. It's not just a peripheral thing, right? It feels not only like an anchor sort of in our practice. It's integrative, but it reminds us that we're doing this practice for each other. In some ways, you could reverse it and say the whole point of the practice is like the healing and the in memory and the intentionality and the relational matrix that kind of undergirds and that we name as in terms of like who we're sitting for. So I just feel moved to say that it feels powerful to me. And in that light, I really want to name, it was just my cousin Jared Finkelstein's yahrzeit, and I'm still in the midst of this year of mourning for my mother, Janet Adler. I want to just in this as we go into our silence today, I actually wanted to speak about something that I've gleaned from the great Marilyn Robinson, who I imagine is familiar to many of you, wonderful author, contemporary author, and sage, like public sage, who has written, I think, Housekeeping, Gilead, Home, a lot of wonderful novels, and has a new book on reading Genesis. So she's been making the rounds and doing different interviews and promoting the new book. And one of the things that she's said recently, in speaking about the challenges of our time, she's shocked by the vulgarity of our time. She's shocked by the mercilessness, the apparent mercilessness of our time, the stinginess. But truly, for Robinson, the great scourge or threat of our time is cynicism. I wanted to talk about this briefly this morning. Um, Robinson will say that actually, for most of us, in terms of our directly lived experience, I guess we could say for those of us who are privileged for this to be the case, um, mostly our directly lived experience is one of goodness, right? That we encounter so much goodness in our day-to-day lives. We benefit constantly from kindness, from consideration, from honesty. Um, and yet it feels as if somehow that's less real than the horrors and the atrocities that we are reminded of in various ways, whether personally or collectively. So it's for Robinson, she says it's as if we're expected to have a mannerism or a pose of cynicism. We feel that to say that people are good is naive. And she says she calls cynicism a fad. And she says, I'm quoting now, it's terrible to say that a great civilization could collapse from the force of a fad, but sometimes I feel as if that's what's happening. I should say she makes the distinction between cynicism and skepticism. She says skepticism is always justified, but cynicism is always a dead end. So the reason I want to speak about this is that I think what we do every day when we come here in our sitting practice, I think meditation could be understood as a stance against cynicism or a way of transforming cynicism. And two things I mean by this. One is that meditation is, I think, fundamentally a sensitizing act, or a resensitizing. It's like a remembering to feel, We spend so much of our time in these conceptual, ideological sort of spaces, the kind of haze that we walk through the world in. And as we all know from the fruit of this practice, it's a resensitizing, it's a remembering to feel, it's a reconnecting to our direct experience. Cynicism, I think, in contrast, is against sensitivity. It's cynicism is maybe we could say it begins with pain, for brilliant reasons, and then becomes a calcification around that pain, a strategy to not feel. There's some sense that when we sit as appropriate, right, for each of us in terms of whatever we're holding, but there's this sense that we're being invited into a place of being resensitized. What is here? What is happening? What is this feeling? What is this sensation? The other way that I think meditation is a stance against cynicism is that meditation is also an imaginative act. It's a gesture of opening. Um, I think, we always celebrate how in our textual tradition, we talk about all the ways that one can read the text, right? The different levels that one can read the text. But in terms of our own story, often, or our personally or collectively, we're fundamentalists. We stubbornly believe there's one way of reading the story of our own lives. We have a sort of aggressively stubborn view of the pshat, the literal meaning. Um, so I think this sense of meditation being imaginative, and maybe imaginative and sensitizing are almost the same thing, but imaginative is sitting into our lives, into that kind of stuck story and saying, is that really true? It's like a gentle unhousling of the sort of aggressive, stubborn strictness by which we hold our story and imagine ourselves in the world. So when we sit, somehow more is possible, right? And Robinson has a wonderful quote. She says, "Every moment is a question being posed to you by God. Every moment is God asking what is wanted out of this moment." And it takes imagination to answer that. What is the question that's being posed in this moment? Spiritual practice, I think, in general, depends on sensitivity and imagination, right? Imagination isn't the same thing as being fanciful. Imagination is actively about exploring different ways of seeing, perhaps more accurate ways of seeing. And sometimes when we sit, we notice it's not the object that we're focusing on, but it's more what's being gently transformed is the frame that we're looking through that's informing all of what we see. And I think what Robinson would say is that frame, often the default, is profoundly cynical. And so, this possibility of imagination, to imagine not just our own life being more expansive, but also sort of the collective possibilities at play. Mostly, as Jews, we put our imagination to use in service of anticipating the catastrophic, um, personally and collectively. And so, we worry, and I think when we worry, we actually feel that we're being more responsible, right? Cynicism is safer in a way. It's less naive. We're less vulnerable. We're being responsible by worrying, you know. Um, it's not responsible to talk about beauty, say, given the reality of the world. It's more responsible to be cynical. But the opposite might very well be the case, right? It's not responsible to not talk about beauty. So I want, as we go into our silence right now, really to invite, well, first of all, maybe just to notice our own cynicism, wherever that lands with you. And the ways that we might be closed down, the ways that we might be resigned to a particular way of seeing. Um, Imagination is not about the future, it's more about curiosity about how this very moment could be different from how we're perceiving it or experiencing it. So just to, check in and with softness, knowing we have brilliant reasons, as my mother would always say, for that closing down, to just note where you find that. And then if it's helpful, to go back to how Robinson framed it, you could do it that way, right? What is the question being posed to me by God in this moment? Or maybe more directly, if you like, what is this? What is this sensation in my body? What is this story that I'm telling about myself? What is this feeling? This, so we sensitize and bring ourselves into this moment, into this sit, into this silence. And then I think imagination, we don't even have to try. We don't have to conjure anything. It's just opening the space of possibility. What if where we didn't imagine life, there could be life? What if where we didn't imagine transformation, there could be transformation? Just the question that loosens it and creates space. So we'll sit for about 10 minutes, 10, 11 minutes. May any insight or knowing or experience, any harvest from this time sitting together, may it be for the benefit of all beings everywhere. May all beings be blessed.
Joshua, thank you so much for that practice. Please stick around if you can for a period of Q&A and sharing your experience with this practice. And if you can't stick around, understand, Seifchem L'Shalom, farewell. We'll hope to see you again tomorrow, same time, same channel. And before we get there, though, we'll have a chance for those who are reciting Kaddish to do so. If you'd like to put the name of any loved ones you are holding in today, as you say Kaddish, please put them in the chat and feel welcome to unmute yourself. We'll put the text up on the screen and you can join me in reciting Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash
Shemay Rabba Yoma
Yoma Dibra
Kachayechem
Yomechon Dokeye Tikove Israel
Agala Bisman
Agala Vizman Kaviv
Shmei
Shmei
Yibrak Yibrak
Barach V'Yishtabach
Yam
V'Yitar
Yiseh
V'Yistam
Yitandar
V'Yitbar
Yadar
Adar
Shemay
Shalom Made Kudsha Mikol Birchata B'Shirata Shachata V'Nechamata V'Yamda V'Shivru Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya
Israel,
Shalom Yaleichem Shalom Kol Yisrael V'Yachol
Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So Joshua, thank you so much for that teaching and inviting us to reflect on cynicism. I was taken back to, I remembered my senior year of high school watching a speech, I think it was a commencement speech by Al Gore when he was vice president, about cynicism that I loved so much that I wrote to the White House and asked for a copy, and they sent me a print copy back in the days when, before everything was just posted on the internet, that was all about cynicism. So there's something really important and captivating about it. And the way you spoke about, our practice, just helping to cultivate the habits of, I think, mind and heart and body to be able to respond to those feelings and those waves of cynicism that do seem to be so prevalent. Yeah, and I wonder for you, aside from reading Marilyn Robinson right now, if there was anything else that was sort of pulling you towards this message right now, or how that's showing up for you in your own life, in your own practice. And I'm curious to hear from folks in the chat also about how are you kind of showing up and encountering cynicism or trying to respond. So anyway, yeah, just invite you to that.
Thanks, Josh. I think I'm interested these days. I've been interested in what sort of the hierarchy of experience, like what experience do I have in my life that I feel like this is true, or I can build something off of this, and which am I more dismissive of? And I'm sort of fascinated by the sense that I'm more dismissive often of those experiences of speaking interpersonally, or of goodness, like they're real and I appreciate them and I don't question them, but somehow when I'm sort of constructing my idea of like the world these days, or even my own life, when I'm in a more despairing place, I can convince myself that what's much more real and much more responsible in a sense are those moments of lack of connection, or the moments of where it seems like we're careening towards disaster, that somehow the mind, and my mind, really like puts that at a higher level. And so first of all, I'm just very interested in that, like that's why I was moved by Robinson saying, actually, for most of us, our experiences of goodness far outweigh, those that are, the opposite of that. So, and I guess I'm sort of leaning towards Purim. We have 2 months of Adar, but just this possibility of things, who knows what's possible? I mean, I feel like that what is up might be down, and just sort of that aspect of the Purim ethic. And we have 2 full months of kind of Adar to get ready for it. So I'm I find myself kind of thinking about Purim in that way. How can we imagine more skillfully? How can we take our imagination more seriously? How can we trust our experiences of goodness more readily? Yeah. I'm just looking at the oh, I'm sorry, Josh, you were muted, I think, so I didn't hear what you
Sorry. I
said.
was just saying, yeah, questions that are really cutting to the chase here of questions about how do you, on the one hand, a very real feeling and real perception of a sense of existential threat, um, and not wanting to, like, allow that to fall into the cynical. Though I would say, what comes to mind for me is what you just said. I mean, Purim. That's one response, hopefully with, without the mass bloodshed that's involved in that.
Yes.
But certainly on a more spiritual level, right? That there's that. But I think that's exactly, part of the difficulty that you're really inviting us into is, I think a lot of us have been carrying that, especially over the last 5 months, have been feeling this intense pull towards, oh my God, it's just, it's never going to get better.
Yeah.
And reminding us, that the spiritual response there that we can lean into is a mi yodea, right? Who knows? We can imagine something different.
I think and I'm looking at some of the great questions, yeah, like where the rubber meets the road, questions. I mean, I think we almost have a fear for many of us, and I don't mean the general, I'm really like speaking from my own experience. Sometimes I'll have the fear that, as Judith wrote, like we're being Pollyanna-ish, or we're discounting, we're doing spiritual bypass essentially,
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I feel like, yes, that's always important to check, right? And I think going back to Robinson's point about skepticism is always important. Cynicism less so. Like I think my feeling is, when I'm cynical, there aren't any possibilities that I'm seeing. Skepticism, like I'm maybe after something, or but the important, clearly the importance of us being grounded in reality. But somehow I feel like the greater risk, I'm not worried that we're going to be Pollyanna-ish. I sort of have the feeling that we know what we're up against collectively. We know the threats, whether it's in Israel and Gaza, whether it's like getting ready for this election in our own country. So some of these collective things that we hold a lot of worry around, for brilliant and very real reasons. But somehow I'm not worried that we're going to forget about that. I'm more worried. It's like, and I think this is true politically as well as personally, although that's not my area of expertise, but even talking to people um, in recent weeks who have really said, actually, this is the time specifically to put our imaginations to work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can't afford cynicism. Like, we have to. We have to be imaginative.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but yes, we don't want a tradition, a Judaism that's not rigorous, and that isn't deeply grounded in reality and cognizant of the threats. But I wonder if we err on that side. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm. Yeah, it seems to me, so much of I've been thinking a lot as we're heading towards Pesach about Vihi Sha'amda, the language we use in the Haggadah of in every generation they rise up to destroy us, and we prevail. And I and there's gonna be a lot of talk about that, I'm sure, this year. There's already been a lot of talk about it, but I'm sure that's gonna be a big theme in the weeks leading up to Pesach. And um as you're saying, the act of the Seder is fundamentally like Pesach is all about imagination. It's all
Yeah.
about, imagining ourselves as though we were leaving Egypt. It's all about the imagination and play of midrash that we make at the Seder. And there is something about, you're bringing us to like be real about what's going on, which does not need to lead us to cynicism and then sort of a feeling of powerlessness, but actually, if we're really doing the work, leads us into, okay, and what can we do in response? Uh, so yeah, it's you're highlighting really I think one of the key
Mm.
questions of this next 6 weeks for us, is so huge. Yeah.
I like how you, Josh. I like how you're bringing us to Pesach, to Passover, and put in that light, right? It does seem like it's a holiday that's fundamentally about imagination, and I also like that it's very relational, because like it's not, we don't have to carefully construct a reality that then we don't want to be disturbed. Like we're around the Seder table, right? Literally and figuratively, with so many different freedom narratives and points of view, and we're sort of, as we often say, like traveling together. And so we're hearing different voices. Like my despair might be, interrupted by this person's imagination, and vice versa. You don't know who. So I think it's a collective thing too. I mean, when we sit, we're sitting with it sort of in our own mind, though of course we're all supporting each other's practice. But it's nice to think about these chagim as like opportunities to really, interrupt each other's despairing narratives, and in real time.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, there's some a lot of good comments coming in, and I think just affirming, yeah, this is hard stuff, and also, grounding in gratitude and grounding, beginning in that posture of, moda modani, right. And so, yeah, some really lovely conversations, which also ties in, by the way. I mean, I mentioned the creativity and arts series that we're doing. Like, I mean, it's so much part of uh that's also part of this, is that responses that um play with and open up language and images and possibilities and other ways of thinking. um it's not all political, and it's certainly not all military. It's,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know uh yeah,
That,
there's yeah.
there's a
Okay.
wonderful, I don't know, there's a book by Norman Fisher called, I think it's The World Might Be Otherwise, or The World Could Be Otherwise, um, that I really recommend. I mean, Norman sort of reframes it as like, he really says the role of religious tradition is to be imaginative.
Hmm.
Like it's almost a way of transforming what we mean by like Messiah, right? Or it does, we don't even have to get that large with it, but just that that's the idea of what the religious impulse is, the imaginative impulse.
Hmm. Yeah, when it's good, when it's healthy.
When it's good.
That's
Yes.
sometimes
Amen.
it can also, too frequently be abused and become its own form of Mitzrayim. But when it's healthy, what we try to do certainly is a more imaginative, opening, liberating kind of religious impulse. I was also thinking about, the language on Purim. I probably, will wind up writing a podcast episode on this next week, but I think, or for next week, but about the language of the role that the word da'at, which we often translate here at IJS as awareness, rather than knowledge. The role that plays at Purim, because we just quoted one of the central lines of the Megillah, Umi Yodea, right? Who knows if it wasn't for just this time that you became queen, that Mordechai says to Esther, right? So who knows? There's that sort of openness, contingency. Who knows? The possibilities are open, right? And then there's also, it's not from the Megillah, but it's from the Talmud, and describing like what's the whole tradition of getting drunk on Purim. Where does that come from? That one should get to a point where they ad lo yada, to the point where they don't know, they can't discern between Mordechai and Haman, right? Which obviously can be a very dangerous place to go, as the Talmud itself makes clear. um, but what's the deeper impulse that's sort of behind that? And I wonder if there's something here about transcending the things that we think we know, right? Sometimes that cynicism is this false idol of like, well, I know that, like the politicians and the polls and everything else, it's clear, like it's locked in, it's done, and so the invitation of Purim maybe on the way to Pesach is like to scramble that and like, turn the soil and say, Umi Yodea, I don't know, right? Like we can't, not to be secure or falsely secure in that knowledge, but to renew the notion of knowledge, possibly. Come in with that. That's on the fly, but
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And yeah, Shukah.
wow.
Um,
Okay. Well, there's a lot of really wonderful comments. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful stuff here. Beautiful observations, and yeah, and such a rich topic. And Joshua, thank you so much. This was a really beautiful practice and teaching and conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Josh, and everybody. And have a wonderful, gateway into Purim and Pesach, time of creative imagination.
Amen. Thank you so much. All right, we'll be back tomorrow.